You're listening to The Adventuring Party, talking about gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. I'm Dave.
I'm Owen.
I'm still Savage.
And I'm Warlord Scarr, and I'm here to report the ignominious death of Warlord the Infinite, Dragon Wizard. He went up against a band of plucky heroes, expecting to beat them in glorious hit point reducing combat. Then one of them made him trip on a bag of marbles he had. He fell in a pit. They used a cheap web spell to glue him in place, and then started using buckets to fill the pit with water until he drowned.
Okay. That's not exactly how they expected that one to go, right?
No.
Yeah, one for the sagas, I suppose.
Certainly, I think it'll be quite a tale to be told about many a pub. But
Surely, can we get a ref in here? That seems like a cheap trick.
Yeah. So this week, folks, we are talking about when your high level bad guys end up falling to low level nonsense, and what's gained, what's lost when this kind of stuff is encouraged.
like all great questions, the obvious expansive answer is it depends. If I would make the argument that there's two broad categories of tricks though. And the one of those being exploiting game mechanics, and the other exploiting the game world, and the two aren't quite the same thing. Because to a certain degree, any game system is going to simulate a world to some degree, even if it wouldn't be called a simulationist game, if only because, well, you need some sort of framework for the players to interact with the game world. So hence rules and all that. So it's especially not necessarily the more complicated systems, although you more often see weird rules interactions with the complicated systems, because simple systems can be broken as well. As in use cases aren't covered by the designer, because designers are human; they can't think of everything, and so you can get these loopholes which players decide to exploit. And for me, I far prefer the other category, not entirely distinct, however, of tricks and plans within the game world, as in using the environment, using whatever resources are available inside the framework of the game world to achieve your goals.
Yeah, as I said, is the problem that the players had this bag of marbles to trip up Vargas the Infinite, or is the problem that the game didn't have rules for 13th level wizards don't fall for bags of marbles? There's the question there. So it's like,
So I think part of this is captured in the title, what I presume is the title, Cheap Tricks. It's the economy of effort. Like, Vargas has, anti-magic shell up and probably eaten all his vitamins. But yeah, slipping on those marbles, tested against his dex saving throw or whatever it is, his agility, not something wizards are generally regarded as having quite high stats in. And thus, he fell prey to what is, for the players mechanically, a low effort, low cost maneuver that pays off bigly. Does that make it a cheap trick, or just a sort of an insight into how the game works? I suppose it's when we are blindsided by something that we tend to call foul. And if you're a GM running a game and you see this stuff happen, Well, first of all, your players probably discussed it openly in front of you, so it's not as if you didn't know what was coming. If you decide that the outcome is a flat defeat for your otherwise all-powerful wizard, you don't really get to feel that bad about that. It is, after all, your universe, and you adjudicate it. Unless you're somehow being held by the collar by a particular set of rules that are being exploited, then we might start to talk about the cheapness or the perceived cheapness of any trick. But I'm not the system expert here, and I'm not aware of where all the loopholes are. Owen, cheapness.
For me, right, if someone is genuinely being clever and comes up with a wait a minute, this guy's got to be vulnerable to silver. Now, why? Because he's a fae and all this other stuff. I whip some silver coins at him and it does a huge amount of damage to him. I'd be like, yeah, clever. That was smart. You thought of that one. That was good. That was fine. On the other hand, when certain low-level tricks go in the playbook of being, haha, I just use this and everything works. Like, for example, I'm playing first edition Wolfrup. I cast light on the door. And you're like, okay. And he goes, okay, after a minute, when light wears off, it consumes the object that was cast on. So this is the 1 minute disintegration. I'm like, okay, hang on. Hang on a second now. This is hang on.
Take out the rule book and they flip it open. Well, there you go. It's what
or
it
it's
says.
Something like we're playing 3.5 or 3.5 edition. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go fight a wizard. Right. If I cast silence on him, he gets a save against it. If I cast silence on this pebble, I can move up and I can fight him, and unless he's got silence spell, he can't cast any spells, and he can't dispel the pebble because he can't see it because it's in my pocket.
He can't target it, of course, yeah.
Or basically I throw the pebble in a pile of pebbles on the ground. He can't see which pebble the silence is on. So I go do it that way. And it's like he can do an AoE dispel, but he can't because he doesn't have a silence spell. So it's like, okay, this is too cheap for what it does, and then everyone uses it. Like bad guys use those tactics in pre-published modules.
Oh,
like there's an ambush in a Paizo module where a bunch of assassins are waiting until the party are eating dinner, and then they literally jump in the window with a bunch of stones with silence cast on them and stab the party to death. I had 3 players die to that.
Wow.
And they were like, they got away, and I was like, the whole point is like you make it easy to res them afterwards because it's literally someone tries to assassinate people, and it's a really effective assassin because it's a bunch of effectively high level rogues assassins with gear prepared for them by a cleric to go kill you. And it's like, yeah, okay, so silence is like, oh well, the wizard and the druid and the cleric can now not cast stuff because they're silenced in a room where they weren't necessarily ready for a fight.
I want to buy that module writer a drink.
It's overly strong. And then the stuff that just completely sidesteps game economy. So for example, in 3.5, one of the big things was, okay, you can't the game is designed to exhaust your resources, and it's all about you marshalling your resources slowly. And then there's somebody who goes, right, I cast Rope Trick. After this encounter, I cast Rope Trick. We go up, we wait a day, we come back down.
Oh, the 15-minute adventuring day.
And Rope Trick was incredibly hard to counter. Because there was a number of ways to hide Rope Trick effectively. And the bad guys would have to specifically know you're doing Rope Trick really to counter you. Okay, we go looking for a concealed extra-dimensional portal that these guys are waiting around in. Because Rope Trick is like this Bugs Bunny joke that basically turned into a spell that basically used to completely sidestep game mechanics. That's bad. Those are bad exploits. Like those are ones that become part of the core tactics of the game. And then people start using, and then the game starts to revolve around this second level spell. Or energy resistance is overly strong in 3.5. There's a bunch of examples in 3.5 which
have that trace.
There's a bunch which are just like, okay, well this just breaks the whole economy of the game. And there's a bunch of different ones around there which are known as being, okay, this is too strong. This is a common tactic and it's way too good for what you're doing. Like if someone knows that they're doing it in Cyberpunk or Shadowrun, and you've got one action round, and I have 7.
Oh yes, the roided, the neuro wired up ninja assassin.
Yeah, and there's all these theoretical role-playing disadvantages? No, they're. I'll roll.
They don't
I'll see
have
how
to be a
well you
functioning
role-play
member of
being dead.
society.
I
Yeah.
will say one of the most underrated GM guides I've ever seen was the original Cyberpunk 2020 GM guide. Listen up, you primitive screwheads. That's the actual title. And there's a lot of advice for GMs to deal with the many, many, many tricks that Cyberpunk players use over the years.
Hmm.
What edition was that for? Do you recall?
2020.
So yeah, it's built on a foundation of many a dead campaign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or people using their medivac as a as a door knocker sometimes. Like, oh, we're stuck here. Quickly, shoot me. So the medevac guys come and get us.
And they'll tear through anything. It says
Yeah,
so in the
basically.
rules.
And they'll get
Interesting.
us there. So I mean, I think someone being creative is fine, but when somebody's reading effectively from a playbook of unbalanced stuff,
It's like the
that's
Trip
not cool.
Fighter. Back 3.5 did the Trip Fighter was, I think, the poster board for this cheap trick. It's like, well, you can kill anything. If a man can't stand, a man can't fight. So you've got this Trip Fighter build. I forget the specifics, but it was very easy to get people on their back. And
The spiked chain. Everyone thought that was a great idea, and then they. No, but yeah, there's sort of a difference, I think, here between a trick that your players come up with by themselves by looking at the tools available to them, the world tools and the game mechanics tools, and coming up with something themselves. That's fine. That's a player you being smart. But then an awful lot of what you'll get complaints about from GMs is sort of the net decking tricks, the the builds you get in the optimization boards, or stuff like maybe you should abuse rope trick advice you get on less the more white paper parts of the internet, who are just like, well, yeah, this is clearly the best solution. Does it ruin games? That's not the question you asked.
Join our Discord to present your white paper on using Goodberry to kill people. Please come to us.
Yeah, there's also, apart from the mechanical breaking of the game, there's also the thematic breaking of the game. Because if you're running a game, trying to run a game that is has any pretensions towards being serious, like and not just a Bugs Bunny series of Bugs Bunny sketches, like the various like wacky tricks are going to spoil that atmosphere quite thoroughly.
Yeah.
Bugs Bunny really was the patron saint of cheap tricks, wasn't he?
Oh yeah.
And very Looney Tunes are very instructive cartoons for the starting out D&D player. Be sure to study them carefully.
But yeah, there's sort of it's the classic thing of I have spent the scenario writer, I've spent 1,000 hours researching authentic medieval guard rotas and their equipment and the placement of all of the guards and the wait staff around the king. Fully realized world. Okay. So how do they deal with the wizard accidentally summoning 1,000 giant spiders because they rolled on their wild magic table too many times? It's just like, what? How do they compensate for spiders coming out of everyone's food or something? It's just like, that's not a medieval thing. How am I supposed to do it? And thus, then you get the situation of your carefully constructed, well realized medieval world disintegrating over a random spell roll.
I'm sorry, am I meant to feel any sympathy here? I'm misunderstanding. This person has prepared a game that is admittedly very fine in the details of medieval life, but they're expecting then to run it in a system where magic is possible and everybody knows it.
Well,
and what sympathy am I meant to muster up for that person who isn't accounting for magic?
Well, if this is something the GM came up with and then ran it this obvious, Pendragon game in D&D 5th Ed. Yeah, those just deserve what they get. But I'm more thinking of like someone's running a scenario that has all of this stuff and cannot compensate for even a simple spell or even the presence of magic. And a good example is just like behold our sacred plaque covered in crust. That's down here for 2,000 years, and then someone comes along with the prestidigitation cantrip and just cleans it off and says, "Oh, here's the secret password to the treasure chamber under 15,000 years of mold." And I don't know, maybe
I feel there's a gross mismatch between scenario presented and the system it's being used in, which would make any trick cheap. I fail to. I will tell you, however, speaking of mismatch, an example from my own gaming past comes to mind with War Machine, which was Iron Kingdoms was the setting actually, the role playing game for Iron Kingdoms, which was based, of course, on the very popular 3.5 system with the open gaming license at the time. The only problem, of course, is that War Machine, the Iron Kingdom setting, is one of mechanical, magical, bot-based warfare and black powder and musket sort of artillery and infantry combat. So you'd have things like artillery parks and mortar crews firing great big sort of clockwork shells at lumbering steam-powered mechs. However, because the game is using or was using the 3.5 system, it had to incorporate the SRD, had to incorporate all of the spells from that system, and you haven't seen hell until you've seen a mortar park have a wall of force laid across it on the perpendicular plane, just as they get their orders to fire. It's an impenetrable barrier placed above indirect fire artillery crews in their ready-made graves at that point. Again, the same thing. There's trains in the setting. Same spell used. Lay it about a foot off the ground across some train tracks. That is a derailment. Not to mention a very interesting example of mechanical shearing. These. The game quickly descended into nonsense because the tricks available to the players were not as sort of very well matched to the setting, as it turns out. But
No.
are these were pretty cheap tricks because right after that, every artillery park comes with its own anti-magic field. Yeah, I think there's something to be said for how cheap is a trick. Well, how well matched is it to the setting or the scenario it's taking place in. If you're looking to exploit cheap tricks, then might I suggest that you read spell descriptions really carefully, because some of them have an awful lot of wiggle room. Not to tug too hard on the rope, but going back to rope trick, it's gotten me out of a number of scrapes in the past. Primarily because if you read the description, it's like you can throw a rope up to 60 feet long. Great. What's the minimum on that? There isn't one. If you've got a piece of rope at 6 inches long, you can cast rope trick. And arguably, it's much more useful if you're not working on the assumption that you're going to climb 10 or 15 feet of rope before you get inside the portal. If you can cast rope trick while lying down, you can simply sit up and be inside the portal, and thus immune from damage. Cheap trick, yes. Lifesaver, absolutely. Back to you, Dave. Any other cheap tricks or thoughts on how they should be adjudicated or perhaps legislated against?
Yeah, well, another 3.5 hour trick comes to mind of the healing using a bucket of water. As in drown. The idea is you've a character who's been thrown down into the negative hit points, and you drown them. And the idea is that drowning sets you to 0 hit points. So stable if you're not in great condition. and it's just
It's effectively healing.
yeah, I'm effectively healing, and it's just that it break. I think my the way I would adjudicate these, and the way I would advocate for handling this as a player in most games would be verisimilitude. Like, does this make sense in the context of the game world? As in, if you have a game which is anyway attached to real world physics or biology in even a loose sense, that trick's not going to work.
Yeah, like that's obviously just a rewording of it. Should have said if your hit points are above 0, they go to 0. But the wording wasn't thought of at the time. No one thought there would be this ridiculous, biology breaking exploit, so that wasn't put in. And obviously that's not very hard to errata either by the rules writer or the GM, but yeah. So we basically have these kind of three types. We have the rules exploit, we have the world exploit, where the world cannot handle whatever random trick the players are capable of, and we also have the just the really good efficient plan or lucky plan, perhaps, setup.
A very begrudging respect for player ingenuity I'm hearing there. But yeah, I think those three broad categories do kind of capture a lot of what we concerns us when we talk about cheap tricks. 3.5 seems to generate an awful lot of them. Is there something you said for complexity or options in a system giving rise to more cheap tricks? Do simpler systems fall foul of this less often, or am I completely off base?
Yeah, well, as I was alluding to earlier, complex systems have more interacting rules and more room for loopholes, but a rules light system can be as bad or worse in a different way, in that there simply aren't any references at all and things need to be made up whole cloth. Or what few rules there are interact in bizarre ways, or can be exploited in bizarre ways.
Like, for example, right? Let's look at Fate.
Okay.
People often think Fate is a simple system. It's not. People think it's a really simple system, right? And here's one of the most effective tactics in Fate. 5 of you are fighting some super dangerous bad guy. Okay?
Yep.
Everyone creates an aspect, passes the free tag to
Yeah.
X. Next turn, everyone creates an aspect, passes the free tag to X. Okay, I attack him. I use my 10 free tags for plus 20 to this. He takes 30 damage. He can make his severe consequence for -6, his moderate for -4, and his minor for -2. That still blows him out of his track. He's dead. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. But I'm the big tough guy.
Because it's a
Bye-bye.
storytelling system. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a storytelling system. It's the aspects are going to enrich the scene and create
Bye-bye.
complicated narratives, or be used like a railgun.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the stuff like that where it's just this tactics that are too potent for what they cost or what they kind of the level they're at. Like, if a second level spell is consistently one-shotting everybody, people will have come up with counters to that second level spell consistently one-shotting everybody. Like, that's what it comes down to. If a low level tactic is super effective, it just gets used in real life, overused in real life. Like, look at real life. There's tons of stuff which is, well, this is really simple but incredibly effective. Slingers. Wow, just throwing a stone at someone really accurately is really effective. What do you do about this? We invent shields. It's if a tactic is too powerful, there will be counters in setting for it, or there should be counters in setting for it.
I agree 100%, and in fact, the War Machine example I think is a perfect place where that should happen. That it's kind of on game designers to, especially if you're 4 or 5 editions deep into something, to sit down and go, okay, these are the obvious go-tos here. There's always stuff you won't catch, but we know the power of passive trace, rope trick, in the force field, that kind of thing. What are the counters? What are the credible in-world counters that, in many cases, add something to the world you're trying to describe? Because it demonstrates that the people who live in this world do think about these things, do encounter them. Your characters aren't the first people to come up with this stuff. And if they try it, they'll often discover what most amateurs in the field discover. The professionals tried it a long time ago, came up with something to counter it, and have a different version of this that works better. And you will grow in your understanding of the world once you realize this and are informed about these things. So while I think cheap tricks are really valuable as long as they come with sort of the costs counter. We're experiencing something like this in the real world, of course, where we're witnessing in Europe the first real drone war, and it has brought all sorts of uh, differing philosophies to the table in terms of the future of warfare, and are these weapon systems better or worse, or are these tactics better or worse? What's going to happen in the future? I know it's kind of heavy for what we're talking about here, but these do amount to what are at the moment cheap tricks, but will become increasingly costly as the countermeasures come into view. And it's for games that purport to have a good simulation or give players lots of options. Once you're a ways down the road, I don't think it'd be any harm if someone wrote in the spell description for Fireball or Misty Step, or whatever, what the counters for this, what the credible counters in world for this. In fact, if you look in the spell lists, you'll find a lot of more expensive spells that will negate the cheap ones, but obviously they're expensive. But the negation is that they negate lots of cheap spells, so there's a value there. Okay, so where do we go from here?
Well, I guess we could go from the discussing problem to the more philosophical question is like, when is it a problem and when is it a feature? Like, because I know there's an entire subsection of particularly the OSR games that maybe not the OSR games themselves, because the mechanics are throwbacky as all hell, but certainly an awful lot of the OSR think pieces are all about, you should disincentivize combat and fair fights and really, really lean into the cheap tricks. I think the classic is just hire a bunch of desperate mercenaries or dogs and just sick a pack of hungry hounds upon the kobolds and trolls and overwhelm them with numbers is a big one. Classic 10-foot poles, stuff like, as I said, throw the wizard in the pit and drown him. Things in those kinds of games, that kind of creativity is encouraged. But I've always thought that was pretty incongruous with the concept that you're expected to level up to be one of those high level threats and also like run a kingdom. And wouldn't it be embarrassing if if it came out at the time the new Duke killed a dozen trolls with a weird manure methane bomb? But yeah, like there are environments where that kind of cheap trickery or improv play or courage, like particularly if your game is something like a Wolfrup or a low level cyberpunk, where you are very explicitly the horrible underdogs, and thus all the numbers and stat lines are on the side of your usual foes, and you're expected to step up to the plate with some amazing impromptu strategy just to get by. But a lot of games, I feel like a lot of games still want to have that as a sort of a low level thing. This is where I got the idea that this is a sort of a cheap trick. Is like games I think want people to that these cheap tricks are like the level 1, level 2 tricks, and then you sort of grow out of them as your character gets stronger, and then you start engaging in the honorable hit point reducing a saver suck spell combat, like proper grown up adventurers. And rarely do the incentives to actually grow out of them seem to be as strong as things. Like if you could bypass some hit points by instead of using the combat rules, using the stealth and knockout rules or some other exploit.
I think it's I think there's how do you encourage people to grow past these? Well, the reason that you move on to the bigger stuff isn't because the tricks get any less any more expensive. It's because, well, it's like peekaboo. I mean, I can play peekaboo with a sub 1-year-old and they love it. Try it on a 10-year-old and see how far you get. Your opposition simply won't fall for it anymore, because if you're GMing and keeping the world in a kind of a static state that never responds to what players do, absolutely, players should either have the unfortunate experience of having their soup interrupted by a guy coming through the window with a silent stone and a knife, and thus they learn something about the world and how the rules might be exploited, or have them enjoy the satisfaction of pulling that caper on somebody, but let them get away with it once or twice, but very quickly the opposition will cotton on. And that's why you have to move up the scale to more sort of just direct force spells or whatever it is that lies ahead of you in the world of the game. Cheap tricks only work when there's no counter or no witnesses to relate how the trick works after the fact. And I don't think there's too many of those that really exist for the GM who's trying to think as if the world is a living place. And trying to and adapting to what their players show them. And they should feel free to employ similarly, but possibly not lethal or permanently lethal tricks to demonstrate to players, here's some other ways that you can use the rules, and this is part of the world, and this is what people are kind of expected to do. Kind of relying on the sort of, oh, well, we'll just go with this sort of gentlemanly progression where we, I'd never use my old spells because my new spells are fancier or more desirable. Fine, but if they cost you less to use, they work fine. But yeah, a cheap trick is only cheap until the cost goes up, and the cost goes up because the environment makes it less cheap to exploit that. If it's
Yeah, no, it reminds me of something. I've in a few different campaigns, I've seen GMs offer effectively gentlefolks agreements on the use of certain tactics. A Cyberpunk game I was in many years ago had a GM who was not keen that we were just doing 3-round bursts aimed at the heads of opposition. Combat was more lethal than he liked, and so he made us an offer that if we didn't use that tactic, no enemies would use that tactic on us. Which fair enough, that's the game he wanted to run. And another game, the spell Evard's Black Tentacles was being used in every fight, and the GM made an offer of, if you don't use this, the enemies won't use this. And because it is a nasty spell if you get hit with it, so I think we ended up taking that offer.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Does that seem like an elegant solution, or maybe a capitulation to?
I think it. I don't love it as a concept myself. I would prefer to fix problems at a game at a deeper level, but I absolutely understand as a GM the need to have to consider options that don't make the game less broken. When I did run 3.5 back in the day, I had pages of house rules which I kept players updated on, because just the sheer amount of, well, a lot of those were down to cheap tricks, like using feather tokens to have trees pop up to crush enemies, and
I'll have to read Feather Token again.
It's
yes,
not nearly as dangerous in Fifth Dead.
Understood.
So yeah, honestly, I would prefer either a comprehensive rule set that covers lots and lots of eventualities, or a system where it is understood that verisimilitude comes first, that if we happen to run into a weird combination, that it should be resolved in favor of what makes sense in the context of the game world. That putting your mate's face into the bucket of water isn't going to heal them. It's going to make things worse, because that's what drowning somebody generally does.
If you have a favorite rules exploit or strange interaction, why not come share it with us on our Discord?
Discord shout out, my man.
Discord shout out.
Okay, so I think we've covered quite a bit of this ground, and yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing how people have creatively exploited what's and we've talked largely about spells, but there's all sorts of other things. Magic items are infinitely exploitable. Anyone with an immovable rod and a large creature to kill will tell you that. But for now, I think we'll maybe we should return to this topic and focus on magic items next time, because we could have a lot of fun there. We recently, I don't know if we've released it yet, but we recently did a roundup on magic items on the Tome of Gygax, where there's lots of interesting stuff. So go listen to that one if you like to hear about how it were done back in day.
How did you use the Horde of Bubbles to slay a high-level lich?
That is very trollsome item. Go read it, folks. Is it still in the game? I think it is.
I don't think... we'll see.
Maybe not. Okay, folks. So I've been SavageMick. This has been the Adventuring Party. We have been discussing cheap tricks, although I suppose that depends on how highly you value your DM sanity. But for now, this party's over. Thank you for listening to the Adventuring Party. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, you can head on over to SpeakPipe and drop us a line. Or you can join us on our Discord server, where we keep the party going after hours. Otherwise, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or Twitter. Or you can email the hosts at party@theadventuringparty.net. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike version 3 license. But you probably knew that already. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and look forward to seeing you back here next week. Goodbye.